Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. I'm Ani Anderson.
And I'm Brian Trzaskos. Join us as we explore the science
and art of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools.
Strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional.
Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence.
If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. Hey there, Brian.
Hello, Ani.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I like your blue shirt.
Thanks. I like your blue shirt.
We're all blue.
Yeah, we got some really new colors
Yes.
on our new Somatic Coaching Academy t-shirts. I really like this one. It's
really
part of
nice. I like mine too.
edit.
Yeah, I like mine too.
Hi, listeners. How are you today?
As we're looking at each other's shirts. Hey, everybody. Here we are.
Good to see you. We're talking about something that we started talking about last week. Last week we were describing how we landed a major publishing deal for our new book that's coming out, Manifestation for Dummies with Wiley Press. If you are interested in writing your own book someday, or you're starting to do it, go ahead and listen to that podcast. We started to talk about the 3 levels of manifestation as we were describing the manifestation process of manifesting that book deal. And that's more of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, we're going to specifically talk about these 3 levels of manifestation in terms of writing the book. Because, I mean, these 3 levels, they certainly play into manifesting the book deal. And we talked about that last week, but also we wanted to talk about what was it like to actually write the book and how did these 3 levels of manifestation come into play. So let's just frame out the 3 levels of manifestation, and then we'll talk about how we applied them to actually writing the book.
So some people are going to want to know, well, where did you all learn the 3 levels of manifestation? And this is a concept that is proprietary that we came up with ourselves to describe the manifestation process. Because one of the things that we found was difficult to describe in the manifestation process is this interplay between the physical world and the spiritual world, the body, mind, and spirit kind of thing that we do so well here at the Somatic Coaching Academy. So it's a way of talking about manifestation that we know you are going to be able to listen to and be like, oh, I can get even more into my manifestations because of it. And hey, before you launch into it, Brian, if you haven't pre-ordered your copy of Manifestation for Dummies yet, go to our website, somaticcoachingacademy.com, to pre-order your copy. They will be released on July 7th, and I was going to say on or about. You will get your copy on or about July 7th because we've been warned by the publisher, give it like 2 weeks before you get yours on your steps. It might not be right on July 7th, but pre-order your copy now so that you can get it as soon as possible. And when you order it through our website, you're going to get a whole bundle of cool bonuses that go along with the book and will help you to integrate the information.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So manifestation happens essentially on 3 levels: the physical level, the sensory emotional level, and the spontaneous flow level. Those are what we call the 3 levels of manifestation.
That sounds a whole lot to me like body, mind, and spirit.
Isn't it interesting how many truths come back to those 3 levels, the power of 3? Think about a lot of places.
Like you can't escape from truth. It just keeps coming back.
Yeah. So that physical level, so we can think about this as the body level of manifestation, or the physical level of manifestation. So when we think about manifesting something, just by definition, that means you bring something into a physical form, let's just say.
Physical existence,
right?
yeah, realize
it comes into physical form. That's when something becomes manifest. And a little example we use about manifesting dinner is you might have an idea for dinner in your head, but dinner's not going to put itself on your table. Either someone has to make dinner and bring it there, or you have to make dinner and put it there. Either way, someone has to do something physical in order to make dinner become physical. So,
which is why AI has not mastered making dinner yet.
Exactly, right? Because AI is just works in those theoretical kind of textual kind of things, but it's not
It's not making dinner.
unless you have a robot
Yeah.
doing it, maybe you have a robot making dinner and then, but the robot is then still physically doing it sort of thing. But so manifestation has to happen physical by definition because manifestation means it comes into the hand, it comes into physical form. So on the physical level of manifestation, you have to do something physical in order to bring it manifest, no matter what, no matter what. And so there's always, I guess, upsides and downsides to all things. Sometimes you can overdo the physical manifestation level to try to make things manifest. And sometimes you can underdo the physical level of manifestation and to try to make things manifest. And in either way, you are not becoming the most efficient manifester.
Yeah, finding that balance is really key
Yeah.
to being a proficient manifester.
Yeah. So you could be making dinner and just be working really hard at making the dinner and overworking and physically, trying to make it,
Exerting.
exerting and
You did.
efforting and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And so you're still making dinner, but you're spending a lot more energy than you need to make dinner. And by the way, then you might screw it up because I don't know if
Yeah,
you've
right.
ever had to whisk an egg or something like that. It takes a little bit of coordination. You have to relax a little bit, that kind of stuff. If you're like too rigid and too focused, it just flies
It's like
everywhere.
you shake the milk too long and it becomes butter instead of
Yeah,
cream.
exactly. Right. So there's too much physical stuff there. And then if you underdo the physical, you just be kind of sitting on the couch and like intending the manifest food shows up on the counter. And unless you're a teenager, apparently, like or a cat, like that
That
doesn't
doesn't
work
work.
that way,
Yeah,
kind of
you'll be
thing.
eating cereal. Right, unless you're a teenager.
Yeah, unless you're a teenager or a cat.
Yeah.
Um, Leave that there. So that's the story with like the physical level. Okay, now you have the sensory emotional level. So you can think about the physical level as that body experience. And so someone else can see that from the outside too, by the way, because they can see what you're doing with your actions in the physical world in order to create a physical result. So there's a lot of kind of the law of cause and effect from a visible standpoint when you're looking at what's happening on that physical level manifestation. Sensory emotional turns more towards the inner experience that someone's having. And we might see physical representations of someone's inner experience, but no one can ever know someone else's inner experience. And that's that level of sensory emotional manifestation that can oftentimes get in the way of taking the physical actions in order to create manifestation.
And mental is a part of that, of course, because mental is a part of emotional. And so mental is a part of all that as well. If, you have the thoughts that go through your head or whatever. So in any change process, resistance to change comes up and it's going to show up primarily at the sensory emotional level. And that's when manifestation can get thwarted by your subconscious mind.
Yeah, so a lot of clutter, we call it kind of clutter in the heart mind space with our rigid attitudes or our limiting beliefs. All those things happen at that sensory emotional level.
The sensory experience you have in your body that tells you you're afraid or you're anxious or you shouldn't. And, like we say, what you feel becomes real. So then it becomes your reality. And of course, the thoughts that are going through your mind that are convincing you that you should stop or you should go a different way or something like
Yeah,
that.
and that's of course going to then affect your physical level of manifestation and your physical action, which will affect the outcome that you get on the physical level,
Yeah.
right? So again, you could overdo that sensory emotional level, or you could under engage, let's say, on that sensory emotional
You can
level, right?
over engage with it or under engage with it. Yeah, if you're under engaging with it, you're kind of trying to not pay attention to it, or maybe you're pushing it down, and you're not using that information because it is information to help you. You could also be over engaging with it, and perhaps you feel like you're a super sensitive person or things like that, where it just seems like it's really getting in your way.
Yep. Yeah. You get too caught up on it, hyper vigilant to your internal experience, those
Yeah.
sorts of things. So, both the physical level of manifestation and the sensory emotional level of manifestation are gateways to spontaneous flow. And so, when most people talk about manifestation, like that's what they think about. They think about being in this level of spontaneous flow where what you think about immediately comes into existence. Or when you think about something, you then actually see in the external world something you just thought about. The idea of synchronicities,
Synchronicity,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Synchronicities start to happen
Yeah.
regularly. And it's almost like you can start to see breadcrumbs out in front of you of, oh my God, like that's my intention to manifest is over there. And I can see like the stepping stones to it as I go in that direction. They just start to kind of light up and things start to flow and there's less resistance and things just start to move. And that's the level of spontaneous flow manifestation.
Right. So a lot of people experience spontaneous flow kind of here or there momentarily. Maybe I experienced it once in my 20s, like that kind of thing. Whereas as a manifester, like more as an identity, like I'm a manifester, you can get to the place where you know how to navigate the physical level of manifestation, the sensory emotional level of manifestation, so that you can find yourself in spontaneous flow more often and predictably, because you're becoming the cause of those effects that you really want to see.
Yeah. So we thought we'd just give you some pretty simple examples because there's a lot of examples we could share with you of our process of writing the book on these three levels. But we thought we'd give you some basic kind of examples of how it worked, and then you can kind of look at it in your own life as well and do a little reflection work on it.
I'm really excited for these, fun personal shares that we do here in front of you, listeners, that we haven't talked about before. Because primarily, Brian and I did a lot of writing in our own offices and then swapping chapters back and forth. So I cannot wait to hear where your levels of manifestation showed up, Brian.
Okay, and likewise, and likewise. So physical, should we start off with the physical?
Sure.
So the physical level of manifestation.
Your fat fingers.
Oh yeah, my clunky fingers on the keypad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I was wondering if you were going to talk
I
because,
wasn't,
like,
but I mean I can.
no, I just thought it was funny. I remember you were having trouble, like, because your fingers are thick and, like, the actual process of typing was driving you crazy
Yeah,
some
it
days.
was hard. I had to really kind of work at that on a physical level. Yeah, that was one of the things I really had to do. That's actually what I was going to say. I actually had to type the book.
Yeah.
And I've talked with people, they're like, well, couldn't you just do, dictation? I tried that too. I tried to dictate, but there's something interesting happens in a thought process, at least in my thought process, is
Me too.
different
Yeah.
between dictating it and actually typing it. And I found that when I dictated it, my thought process was less coherent than when I typed it.
Yeah.
So I could get stuff out really quick, kind of just blah, 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 blah. And I still had to go back and clean it up, which means I still had to go and do some
Right.
typing and those kinds of things. So I could not get around sitting at a keyboard and actually typing it out on the physical level of manifestation. Like that just had to happen.
Right.
I had to do that. And in doing that, I needed to engage the sensory emotional level of manifestation also. So you can see as we start to talk about this, an experience never ever solely happens in one of these planes exclusively because as a human, none of us lives exclusively in any one of these planes at any given time. We're always living in all three planes.
Yeah. Yeah. So similarly for me, physical was like making the time because when we signed the contract for the book deal, we already had full calendars and we had 4 months to write this book. And so I needed to be very efficient, clearly communicate to the people around me, and really hold myself accountable to my own schedule in a way that was like super, super high level. And so the act of like having enough energy, for example, making sure I exercised in the morning so that when I got to the place where even in a long day, I had a writing block, I had enough energy to do it. That was a lot of the physical stuff that required me to like have enough energy, sit there, be able to think and write, and the mental emotional stuff that went along with being able to hold those commitments to myself.
Yeah, as we're even kind of batting this back and forth, Ani, I'm trying to like be clear and again compartmentalize this into each one of these, but I can't because on a physical level, what's occurring to me too is my what I was doing physically would determine how I was showing up mentally and emotionally. For instance, let me just say this:
Sure.
when I was doing research for the book, like physically, I could be at my computer and like dialed into the computer and doing research And as I'm pulling research out, compartmentalizing it into places, knowing that I was going to use it at a certain point in time in writing the book, right?
Right.
But then when I would sit down to be creative in writing, I would just sit and stare at the computer screen
Mm-hmm.
and like type a couple of things, but I don't like that, and back and type a couple of things. And then I would go, well, maybe just I'll just blot stuff out there and I like put a bunch of stuff out with a bunch of typos and those kinds of things. And that doesn't make sense to me. I found that on a level of like productivity or stepping into a level of spontaneous flow, like how I use my physical body
Mm-hmm.
was very important.
Agreed.
And
Yeah.
and I realized like after the first couple of days of spending about 10 hours at the computer trying to write chapters and only getting like a couple of pages done, I thought I can't keep doing this because I don't have that kind of time. I
Right.
need to figure out a way to be more efficient. So like when my physical body is like dialed in at the computer, what can I get done with that type of energy? And I realized I can research a lot like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it comes to actually writing creatively, I needed to use my body in a different way
That's interesting.
for me in order to open up the sensory emotional level and spontaneous flow levels.
Where you were mattered too, because you actually spent more time in the house writing at times too. So that was important too as well,
It was
like
important to me.
figuring out
Yeah,
your
where I was writing was important to me.
right.
Yeah, so where I did research, I did a lot of research in the house,
Oh, okay.
and I did a little writing in the house, and I did more
Writing over here.
writing in the office. But that's not the thing. What I figured out I had to do to free up my sensory emotional level for the what I was actually writing on the pages was I would go for hikes and I would go for
Mm-hmm.
walks. And I was as hiking and I was walking and I allowed my sensory emotional level to shift and become more open and less rigid. Because the research, I could be dialed in and be kind of very boundaried with my sensory emotional level in order to very quickly capture information.
Right.
But in writing, I realized that was a huge hindrance. I needed to be more open, more
Yeah.
fluid,
Oh,
more
that's
adaptable in writing. So I would go take walks and I'd hike and I would dictate just short blurbs into my phone,
uh-huh.
into my notes app
While
on
you're
my phone while
walking.
I was walking.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I would write, I would come back and I would expound upon those ideas.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
See, that part's pretty easy for me. Like the being open to the flow of the writing is pretty easy for me. The editing was actually way harder. But the thing that I'm reminded of while you're talking about this is the fact that we had to share a computer for a portion of this project. So Brian wrote in Google Docs on his computer. I wrote on Google Docs on my computer. But then, because of how Wiley works, we needed to do
Formatting.
formatting on one computer locally, not online, not on the cloud. And when we heard about that, we were like, you've got to be kidding me. Because both of us are super busy. How on earth are we ever going to figure this out? And we very quickly triaged that because I'm in general a little bit better with technology. It was going to be done, the formatting was going to be done on my computer because I was going to format. That was how we kind of divided and conquered. But because the formatting was going to be done on my computer, that meant I had to have periods of time where I let you use my computer,
Yep.
which meant I couldn't use my computer. So, from a physical standpoint, first of all, I can't even imagine even 3 years ago, Brian, being able to navigate that physical level in this project. Like even 3 years ago, I think I would have really spun out from a sensory emotional standpoint with like not having control over using my computer when I needed to use my computer, or you're on my computer, or having to navigate that whole sharing process would have been really hard for me. So I think from a sensory emotional standpoint, I've just developed enough mastery to be able to handle that. But that was a big deal.
Do you have some tips about how you're able to like work at that sensory emotional level to navigate those challenges?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of deconditioning with my patterns that I've been working on for a long time. Like letting go of control is something that I've been working
Hmm.
on for a really long time. And so I'm familiar with my patterns. I have deconstructed my patterns and reconstructed my patterns. I've done a lot of cross mapping in the past. I also am really, really familiar with the sensory stuff that I work on every day in my body. I practice my safety anchors, and I know the kind of experience I want to have in my sensory body, and I practice that every single day. And so if I ever started to feel like I was getting spun out about it, or I was starting to grip onto old patterns. I knew exactly the sensory base to come back to that helped me to get to that place. Also, I did more than the average bear's amount of core centering,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Too. Yep.
During the process of writing the book. It really reminds me of this thing that the Dalai Lama says that he meditates more on during busy
Yeah.
times.
Hmm.
And from a standpoint of being able to like see your calendar, I couldn't imagine how that happens. But honestly, I practiced more and I exercised more and I was busier than ever. And both of those things had to happen simultaneously. And they did. It was like time bending needed to happen.
Yep. So maybe it's actually part of a gift. I was taking your computer away from you for several hours because then it gave you time to run and practice.
Well, sometimes, yeah, like sometimes it was a gift because I
I
could
would
have.
say, hey, when are you running today? And I could use your computer when you're running.
Right. So I could have over physical leveled, by working even more than I needed to or I should have, but letting go of my computer gave me an
Yep.
opportunity to work at just the right balance of physicality. I can't work all the time. Like I know you have like more of a hardy kind of constitution for that, but I'm delicate flower. So, I can only work so much and then I know like I've gone past my point.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I think moving into that level of spontaneous flow, talked a little bit like physically had to actually write the book. And sometimes I'm writing for literally 10 hours a day, between research, between writing, blocking off time in the calendar, moving stuff around, weekends, lots of evenings, writing,
Yeah.
and preparing and organizing and all that kind of stuff. I finally kind of got into a groove where if I knew I was going to have a writing day and I knew what chapters I was going to work on that day. So I said so by the end of this day, I'm going to have this chapter done.
Right.
And I was like, I don't care
Yeah,
how
it's the
long I have
same
to be
thing.
at it, but I'm
Yeah.
going to get that
Yeah.
because I have all these other things to do.
Deadlines
So I've
to
got to
be
get
done.
that chapter done.
Yeah.
Whatever I get done that day is what I'm going to get done that day.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever no matter what, that chapter is
It's
going to
gonna
be
get
done.
done. Yeah.
And so I would wait to write the chapter though until I had enough of those little blurbs.
Mm.
Like I said, like I had gone for some walks, I'd done a little hiking, that kind of stuff. I'd kind of gotten out of the office. I had opened up the space a little bit, did some meditation, let some stuff flow in. I got enough blurbs and I had my research done already for the chapter. So I kind of had like all the nuts and bolts I needed,
Right.
but I still didn't have the narrative part written. So what I would do is every morning I do a core setting practice, right? And sometimes it is between 45 minutes and typically sometimes 90 minutes, 45 to 90 minutes. And on some of those mornings it would be longer, it'd be like 90 minutes. I would trend towards doing a longer practice. And this is why. Because before I would do the practice, I would I would
Mm.
just really quick look at the research and I would look at all the blurbs and I would just start doing my core centering practice
Let it kind of come
and I would
together.
invite the narrative to flow into me and it would.
Mhm.
And I would start to get just like, then it would just start to flow. It would just start to come in and I could just like hear it speaking into me basically on that bullet point. What am I going to say about that? But that bullet point, what's the universe say about that? That bullet point, what's the universe say about that? And I basically would have the chapter in large part written internally by the time I was done with my practice.
Mm.
And then it was just a matter of getting my fat fingers on the keyboard
Right.
and getting stuff actually typed out.
Right.
And so that's how I actually kind of worked into this idea of being in spontaneous flow
Mm-hmm.
of this book.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about this book being written, sure, at least for my chapters, my fingers typed out these chapters, but this
Couldn't
information
be though.
flew through, came through me.
Right.
I just opened up the space and allowed it to flow through me
Right.
and kind of filter through the research and filter through the blurbs that I had. And I just asked the universe to help me fill in all the blanks
Right.
between those spaces. And when I did that, now I'm not struggling anymore to write in spontaneous flow. I've still got to use energy to get down and write. And by the way, a lot of times there feels like there's a lot of distractions when you're writing. I get to a place where
Yeah.
I've written for a while, about an hour, and then all of a sudden a part of me is like, you need a snack right now.
Right.
Another part's like, isn't it nice outside? It's just like go outside. I think we were like during the cold winter months, so it wasn't as bad. But it was still like, hey, go outside. Isn't it beautiful out there? Why don't you go outside, go do something? So I had to continue to bring myself back into the task, stay focused, silence my phone, turn off all my alerts off, all those kinds of things so I could be present present with what I'm doing and keep coming back. If I needed to get up, move, shake, sometimes I need to go do another practice in the middle of the day in order to invite more information to flow through me and then turn around and get that information down. So it was really in this idea of and being in a spontaneous co-creation with the universe, basically helping me to write the book.
Yeah, I think my spontaneous flow really came into click once I recognized like I just signed a contract with you to write this together. And any of the BS that I had gotten involved with for the past 15 years or whatever we've been together with little like issues that, I might like get all into, and like there was no time for any of that. So if I was going to think that you were smarter than me, or I was about, as good as you, or I'm better than you, or like any of that BS had to go off to the side. I needed to not take myself so personally,
Mm.
and be able to like step into this. Really was spontaneous flow though, because it wasn't like making myself. I just decided that any of the BS patterns that I'd had in the past that prevented me from working well with you were gonna have to be reconditioned.
Mm.
And I have to give myself a big huge pat on the back about that, because like we not only shared a computer, but Brian would write a chapter and then I would edit the chapter. And how about that, to have your partner, like your life partner, like look at your creative process and hand it over to them and say, edit this,
Yeah.
that's a big deal. And
Yeah.
then same thing for me, to take my heart and soul that I poured out on the paper and give it to you to chop up with a red marker, and then bring it back, and to allow myself to be in the flow of whether there was criticism that came back or there was praise that came back. I wasn't going to get attached to it. I wasn't going to take myself personally. It was information that was flowing through us. I didn't have to take that
Mm.
personally either. And really allow ourselves to have this flow back and
Mm.
forth, to the point where we wrote the whole thing and we sent it in bit by bit. And I think we thought originally that we were kind of gonna get some chapters back and be in also in this flow of editing, but we weren't. We wrote the whole book and then we got the whole book back.
Mm.
And I
To do
think,
our author reviews. Yeah.
yeah. And I think for both of us, as we started to get the editor pieces back and read it back, both of us were like, this is really good. Like
Hmm.
it was really fulfilling to be in that part of the process. And I remember when I self-published my first book, and that part of the process, I took a lot of stuff personally when the editor started to
Mm.
get in there. And I didn't. I promised myself I wasn't going to with this, and I just let it really flow. And then it became a co-creation, not just with you and me, but a co-creation with Wiley and the editors too, which I
Boy, weren't the
trusted
editors
implicitly.
amazing
They
at
were
Wiley? Just
awesome every
amazing.
step of the process. They were so great.
Just so great. Yeah.
So great to work with. And it did feel like this larger group project at that point where everybody got to be an expert, in their stuff. It was funny when the editors started to get a hold of the stuff and would tell us things like, remember when you put table tennis?
Oh, yeah.
No,
But ping
no, was
pong.
it ping pong?
Yeah.
You said something about ping pong, and they're like, you can't say that. It has to be table tennis. There were there were all these things that
Ping
were
pong
like,
is copyrighted,
this is
actually.
copyrighted. That's copyrighted. You can't say the words to this song, and that quote probably didn't come from that person, and you can't say this in case you can't say that. And at first, when that first started to come back, my taking it personally came up again, because I was like, this is our creative project. Like, don't stomp on our stuff. Like, this is our voice. And then I was like, no, it's not our voice. It's our info combined with Wiley and how they do things. And this is a co-collaborative process. And that's how manifestation works.
Yeah, and it was really wonderful too because, oftentimes we get back from the editor, like, I don't understand what you're saying here because, Ani and I, we kind of live in our own world in a lot of ways. And so we're like, we understand what we're talking about to each other.
Yeah.
Then we put it out there, like, we don't have
What is
enough context for this. What are you talking about? I don't understand this.
What is
And so it's
somatic?
great to, yeah, what does somatic mean? It's the first time we've used it in the chapter. We need to define it here. And they're like, wow. So it's so good to get that feedback and go, oh my God, you're right. Like we
Yeah.
need to be attentive to these things. And that's why it was so amazing and powerful to have
Oh,
that
great.
reflection back. I got an interesting question from a friend of mine when we were writing the book. And he said, how's it going to work if Ani's writing part of the book and Brian's writing part of the book? And will there be a cohesive voice?
I know, right?
And I said, well, we're editing each other's stuff. So I think that's going to kind of infuse and bring some cohesion to the voice a little
That
bit.
too.
But I'm curious for readers, when you read the book, if you don't know what chapters we've written,
Can you guess?
can you guess which of us have written what?
Love
Sort of thing. I think that's kind of a fun little game to play. To see is how cohesive is our voice together, knowing that we had to work on this, not only this physical level with swapping computers and using Ani's computer and actually editing each other's stuff, but the sensory emotional stuff that comes up when you're editing each other's things and kind of advocating for, I think it should sound like this, or I'd like it to sound like this. Doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't make sense to me. I think we should include that because we had to cut like
A
a
lot.
lot out of the book, actually. We had a very tight page count for the book. And so
382
we
pages,
had to
if I
let
remember.
go of, and at first when we looked at the base count, we're like, how are we going to actually write over 380 pages about manifestation? And we had like 400s of pages. And we're like, oh my God, we need to cut 16 pages here, 20 pages there kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff that didn't even make it into the book.
Yeah.
Right. So we actually had to talk about that too. What are we going to cut? What part of
Yeah.
our baby
What
are we going to let
gets
go
cut?
of here? And then of course the editors are like, this, you're cutting this part.
Yeah.
We don't need that. But they were great about that too. But so that's a whole part of it too that we were working on. But hopefully you kind of see that the spontaneous flow. Oh, the other cool spontaneous flow thing that happened when I was in those states of writing is I would communicate with people and people would reach out to me with their manifestation stories at just the right time.
Yeah.
And I'd say, oh my God, that's exactly what I needed for this chapter
Yeah.
right now in this place. So there's the idea of synchronicity
Yeah.
around things, which was also really, really cool. So for me, it felt
Yeah.
like the universe was really helping us to write this book.
Yeah, and the stories for me in spontaneous flow, the stories were like, oh, I need a story. Oh, that story is just perfect. This thing that happened 10 years ago with a client, or maybe it was just yesterday, but like everything just going,
Mhm.
that exact right story, plink, 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 was so awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's basically kind of a look at the three levels of manifestation, which we write a lot about in the book because we work them into every one of the sections
Yeah,
of the book
exactly. Yeah.
that we're writing about and working with. So you get more information about them there, and just how we use those levels in writing the book.
Yeah, so again, I'm just like laughing to myself so hard. I can't wait to see if you can tell which sections were mine and which sections were Brian. If you haven't pre-ordered your copy yet, go to somaticcoachingacademy.com. You'll be able to order the book there with your bonuses because we want you to be able to get some of the stuff actually that we cut is in one of the bonuses when you buy the book in the ebook that we wrote as a companion guide. So go ahead over to somaticcoachingacademy.com, pre-order your book, and we cannot wait to hear what you think about that. And for now, think about those three levels of spontaneous flow, sensory, emotional, and physical manifestation in your life until we see you next week.
All right, see you next week. Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself.
Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time.